A couple of years ago, when the germ of this idea for this session came up, we were talking about should we bring the university presidents to speak at our convention, and somebody said, well, maybe one. But if you want to know what's really going on, you should bring provosts. And so that's the idea. And I'm delighted this afternoon to introduce you to 3 chief academic officers. I'd not met them until today. I'm happy to have them with us. They're from 3 very different institutions. We have represented a Big Ten research institution. We have a regional state institution, and we have a private university. And let me tell you who they are. I know that you have questions, and I want to save about half this session for your questions, but I would ask you to go to the microphones in order to do that. I think we learned this morning that not everyone can hear if we just speak from the seats. So I'll let you know when it's time to do that. And you can be thinking about your questions. So to introduce our panel, to my immediate left is Dr. Karen Hansen. She is the Executive Vice President and Provost of the University of Minnesota, and she's been doing that since 2012. Probably feels like a lot longer, right? She's a graduate of the university, having earned a Bachelor of Arts degree in philosophy and mathematics before going on to Harvard for master's and doctoral degrees in philosophy. Her research focuses on the philosophy of the mind, ethics, and aesthetics. Dr. Hansen previously served as provost at Indiana University, and beyond the academic affairs office, she has served as board chair of the American Philosophical Association. And are you currently an officer at the Dewey Foundation?
We've disbanded.
We've disbanded, okay. Was an officer at the university, at John Dewey Foundation. At the end over here is Dr. Beth Ingram. She served since 2014 as provost at North Dakota State University, where she's also professor of agribusiness and applied economics. Beth is a graduate of the University of Iowa, where she later moved up the ladder from student to faculty, to dean, then to associate provost. She received her PhD in economics from the University of Minnesota, and she joins us today from the campus of one of our oldest chapters. The North Dakota State University chapter celebrated their 100th anniversary in 2014. Dr. Jeffrey Aper. Dr. Jeffrey Aper is provost of Millikan University in Decatur, Illinois. He earned a bachelor's degree in social science from Blackburn College, a master's in environmental studies from the University of Illinois at Springfield, and a PhD in educational research and evaluation from Virginia Tech University. He taught at the University of Tennessee at Knoxville and at Southern Illinois University at Carbondale before going over to the dark side. He was provost first at Blackburn for 12 years before being named chief academic officer at Millikan in 2014. Dr. Aper is the co-author of a book on the history and philosophy of American higher education, and he is a Phi Kappa Phi member, having been initiated in 1988 by the Southern Illinois Carbondale campus chapter. So welcome to you all. Happy to have the conversation with you this afternoon. And I thought we'd start with what you consider the greatest challenge to higher education. Karen, would you like to begin?
Well, we were just recounting that there are lots of challenges. I'm not sure I could single out one. But I'll speak on behalf of a large research university, a public research university, though. We see challenges with the continuation of research funding. I mean, there's a particular threat in Washington right now, even though things have been saved for a little while. So that's a huge part of our portfolio. We do about $900 million in sponsored research every year. And the idea that research funding might be cut, we would be a completely different institution and able to do a lot less for society. We feel the growing gap in resources between public research institutions of our type and the best private research institutions, and that means we are in a constant scramble to retain and recruit faculty. We see a lot of skepticism from the public about the value of higher education. I mean, that's something that we need to address both politically and in what we do. We are we have, in some sense, the enviable position of being the only research university in Minnesota, but and hence we have a lot of services that are provided throughout the state. We have campuses throughout the state, and we have extension services. In Minnesota, you mentioned that came from Indiana. Minnesota is kind of like Indiana and Purdue together, and so we have a lot of the benefits that I think a place like Purdue has in Indiana, providing things that people recognize, the citizens of the state recognize as valuable. But that's not always translating into friendliness from our legislature that funds us. And so we feel economic challenges, we feel cultural challenges, and we feel challenges in the higher ed and research ecosystem.
Thank you. Jeff?
I think that I would have to say the biggest things, it's a combination of things, as communicated, Karen. The biggest issues for me that kind of keep me awake at night that I worry about very much all revolve around budget and enrollment. And Millikan University is an institution of about 2,100 students, squarely in the middle of the state of Illinois, which, as you may know, is vying for the title of most corrupt state government in the history of the United States, and also most dysfunctional government in the history of the United States. And though that kind of instability politically spills over into a lot of different kinds of areas that affect us as an institution. And so one of the things that we observe is that in the state of Illinois, fully half of graduating high school seniors who plan to attend college will go out of state to get that education. And that's an extraordinary challenge for all of us in Illinois, because Illinois is a fairly large state, one of the more populous states in the union, and yet a very large number of those students are leaving the state, at least in part because the opportunities that they see in Illinois and the support for higher education in Illinois has been eroded, not the least of which, and perhaps most directly, in that the state has pledged for many years through what's called a monetary award program, financial support for students who attend a public or private institution within the state, and they meet basic qualifications. It's driven by financial need. But the state has yo-yoed back and forth on its ability to support that program over time. Again, students who are already being attracted to opportunities outside the state find that uncertainty even more unsettling, and I think that it drives the continued exodus of students from the state. So we find ourselves in, I think, very challenging circumstances. And private institutions, of course, tend to be highly tuition-driven in terms of budget. And the financial model that underwrites that system, particularly for those independent institutions across the United States, that financial model is a frightening one and a perilous one. The amount of borrowing that has become a norm for many students is, I think, profoundly concerning. I went to school as an undergrad in the mid-1970s. And in the 70s, the orientation of support systems for students was primarily based on the philosophy that higher education is a public good. Allowing more people to get a college education was understood to be a general good serving the larger public. But in the 80s, that philosophy was reversed, and higher education came to be seen primarily as a private good. And so you saw the inversion of a system that was largely based on grants to a system that is based almost entirely now on loans. And while philosophically that may be an understandable approach to all of this, in reality it drives a financial set of mechanisms that put institutions like mine in the position of competing in ways that are not necessarily to the benefit of the students involved, as far as their ability to get the education they want and deserve, and their ability to persist in earning the education that they want and deserve. So there are a lot of challenges in that, and that's a primary concern. But I think it is encompassed within this larger consideration of that whatever that the sign of the times are, the cultural milieu that leads us to be facing a highly skeptical general public. And to be frank, anti-intellectualism has long been a staple of American culture. And, you know, by saying that, I suppose I'm sounding like some sort of intellectual elitist or something, but it has been. I mean, historically, this is not even deniable, I think. And so we see this throughout the thread of the history of higher education in the United States. And I think that this combination of the highly monetized set of issues that we've started to touch on here, along with this cultural framework within which expertise is questioned, the value of prolonged periods of intense study are questioned, and all the kinds of things that we tend to value most profoundly within the academy are at issue. We're in a very challenging time. And I will add one thing, and then I promise I'll stop talking. What I tell my faculty colleagues regularly is that we've got a lot of challenges. We're operating in an uncertain and very turbulent environment in many ways. However, I would also say, without any hesitation, the work we do has never been more important. The work we do as colleges and universities, the work of the faculty, the work of professional staff members who support the learning and development of students has never been more important in the history of this country. And so it's that combination of extraordinary opportunity to do something truly noble and important and meaningful, faced at the same time with very substantial challenges, financial, cultural, political.
Thank you, Jeff. Beth?
So I am thinking about what I can add to this because you'll notice that Provosts spend a lot of time thinking about budgets and resources. North Dakota State is a regional institution in the sense of the draw of its students. About 40% of our students come from North Dakota, about 55% come from Minnesota, and another 5% are scattered around. We've been around for 125 years. We're a land grant, and we've always been pretty secure in our mission to serve the state of North Dakota, to educate the kids of North Dakota and northern Minnesota, and to serve the state through our land grant mission. And what keeps me up at night is thinking about whether that mission is actually doable in the current culture and the current situation, and how we pursue what our president wants us to pursue, which is a residential experience for those students. I think a lot of public institutions have started altering their missions to capture other student markets, the adult market or veterans or other groups, and it's terrific, and we should be thinking more about how we serve those groups of students. But when your fundamental mission for 100 years has been basically serving first-time, first-year undergraduate students, and you wonder if that's a sustainable mission because of the way resources flow. You start to question your fundamental reason for what you do. And a book I would recommend to all of you, which was written by a Minnesota economist, Nathan Graw, Demographics and the Demand for Higher Education. It's really sort of a scary book to read if you live especially in the Midwest, because he talks about what's happening with demographic changes and the decline in the number of 18-year-olds, and what's going to happen 10 years from now when we see the outgrowth of the 2008 fertility cliff. And so, it's important for institutions to start thinking about what students are you going to serve, how are you going to serve them, and how is your mission going to change as you adapt to fewer and fewer first-time, first-year students and other populations that you can be serving, but they have to be served in very different ways than an 18-year-old walking onto your campus.
Thank you. That reminds me then of an article that was reported in the Atlantic in May And the headline grabbed me. It was called "A Dangerous Milestone in American Higher Education." And the report was that for the first time, public colleges and universities in most states were receiving most of their income from tuition rather than from government appropriations. At the same time that this was happening, the second vector was that the nation's youth population is becoming more racially diverse than ever. So what have those developments meant for you at North Dakota State?
North Dakota has actually not reached that tipping point yet. We're about 60% state funded and about 40% tuition funded. But certainly if you look at any chart from any other institution, we're heading in that direction. And most institutions have already reached that tipping point. To me, one of the issues that arises with that is that because we're a public institution, we report to a board of higher education. They report to a state legislature. That legislature really hasn't eased up on how they control and regulate what we do, even if the funding has gone down. And rightly so, we're a state institution. We need to respond to the needs of the state. But when you're constrained on the resource side, when tuition is going up and students find it less and less affordable to come to your institution, even when you're a very inexpensive institution, you're still a big chunk of income for the average North Dakotan. And you're also restricted in how you can be flexible in meeting the needs of those students or finding other populations of students. That's what makes it really difficult, is to have your hands tied and at the same time be constrained in terms of both resources and how you can respond to those resource stresses.
Thank you. Karen, has that been true in Minnesota?
We've long since passed that point, although it depends on how you count. If you think of some of the state support for some of the research enterprises that's specifically dedicated to certain problems in Minnesota, we still, in some ways, the taxpayers are generous to us, but we've long since passed the point where the students are shouldering the bulk of the costs of their own education. And that's a really serious problem for public higher education, and especially at a research university. We have faculty who are dedicated to all parts of the mission, to research, education, and outreach or service to the state. And in many ways, it's not fair that students are having to shoulder so much of that financial burden of the support of the institution, when, in some sense, as citizens, they may be benefiting from the elements of research and outreach. But in other ways, it's a kind of fundamental crisis. And the way in which many institutions of our type, we haven't done this, I'm going to say this, but many institutions of our type have eyed the idea of going private. So that you take off the constraints that might be there from public sources of funding. It's at a place like the University of Minnesota and most of the other Big Ten institutions, that's really a pipe dream because of the investment the state has made in the infrastructure of the campus, and it's not doable. We're not thinking about it, but other institutions of our type have thought about that because there has been this fundamental disinvestment, and it's meant that our students have had to shoulder more of the costs of their own education, and then frankly, the political issue that swirls around that is the extent to which the university itself is involved in a kind of redistribution scheme for the costs of higher education. Because, we do offer need-based scholarships. Where is that money coming from now? It's not coming necessarily from specifically allocated pots that the state has given us. Sometimes it's coming from our own redistribution of the resources we have. And then there can be political disapprobation from our own state about something like that. So people are trying to manage this passage, which is in some ways a kind of economic crisis for public higher education, in a variety of ways. All of them have unfortunate elements built in. I mean, I don't think that the University of Minnesota managed its resources very well. More than half of our students graduate with absolutely no debt. And of those who do have debt, the average debt is about $27,000, which is manageable. I think that's not the story that people hear about it. And then the social effect of that is it's very discouraging to students who are coming from under-resourced families to even think about higher education. I think one of our biggest challenges, and this is specifically not just serving the nation better, but serving our own state better, is that there's a growing economic disparity along racial lines in Minnesota. And that is a huge problem for the state in the future. And it's not being ameliorated by some of these forces on higher education.
Well, that's what the writer of the Atlantic article was making the point, that the greater racial diversity in young people today means that many fewer people are coming with the means to provide for their own education.
And even if right now we might find ways of addressing that for the individual students if they would come, the story is so discouraging that it's often the case that people don't even put their foot on the ladder. And of course we engage in outreach and try to get all those students in, but it's a huge cultural problem.
Thank you.
And don't you think the uncertainty also over federal there's been a lot of uncertainty recently too about the availability of need-based aid and where it might come from in state programs, and that filters down to the high schools as well.
Yeah.
Jeff, your state has experienced an interesting, well, you made reference to it earlier.
Interesting, yes.
I've lived in a couple of, I'm an Illinois native, so I know that, but I've lived in a couple of competing states to that standard you cited. But your state was without a budget for a couple of years.
Yes.
How did that affect your private institution?
Well, it's a disaster. Again, one of the most, I think, readily observable circumstances is one I mentioned earlier, and that is the MAP program, the Monetary Award Program for students who want to pursue an undergraduate degree in Illinois, public or private institution, was subject to such an extraordinary level of uncertainty that many students and their families concluded that they couldn't depend on what essentially is the promise that the state has made. The state of Illinois pledged to students who qualified that they would provide substantial assistance to them to cover the costs of their education. And when the state demonstrated an incapacity for basic governance, that is creating a functional budget, many citizens of the state of Illinois elected to move out of state. But one of the things related to what has already been mentioned, Illinois, of course, is a very diverse state, and Millikan is an institution that has actively sought to reflect the diversity of the state. And I think there are many very good reasons for us to do that. Right now, about a little over a third of our total undergraduate student body is made up of people who have a background from underrepresented groups, historically underrepresented groups in American higher education. And one of the things that I think is striking to think about is that if you look at the history of student engagement in higher education in the United States, what you see is this increasing reach of inclusion over time, whether that is women, African Americans, Jews, and other groups that were specifically barred in one way or another, had opportunities that have continued to evolve. And I think we see some of the ongoing echo of those kinds of achievements and developments, especially because, for example, now at Millikan University, we serve a very large number of first-generation students. And for first-generation students who come from families that don't have a lot of financial means, this whole prospect is quite daunting. And to talk with a student who comes from a family that has a calculated zero estimated family contribution, if you're familiar with the wonders of FAFSA, you know that the federal government gives people magic numbers about what they think their family should be able to pay. We encounter a lot of students who want to attend Millikan University. We believe that we can serve them very well. The challenge is they have no financial capacity. They don't have really a cultural background. Their families, their parents probably don't have a lot of experience. They didn't attend college themselves. And it's very challenging for students, and it raises a host of other questions for the university. Aside from our obvious effort to assure that we have high-quality academic programs and opportunities for students, students who are coming to us who bring a lot of different kinds of background, and it's not just financial, but cultural as well. Institutionally, we have to think differently about our identity. Who are we and what do we do? How do we serve the larger society in a way that has genuine value, that contributes to the meaning and value of the lives of the students we serve? And I think that it's a fundamental challenge for institutions of all kinds, but particularly for a private institution, because we're kind of ahead of the curve that has been described. We are out there in a situation where to be able to manage the financial model that many students are trying to deal with in their families, we are essentially giving back millions, tens of millions of dollars to students. That's from dollars that would go to operating. Though my institution has a $50 million budget. I'd like to have $900 million for research, but we can talk about that later. But we have a $50 million budget. We're giving students in the neighborhood of $25 million a year in aid, most of which is coming from operating dollars. And so the institution is in this kind of precarious spot where we've got to continue to provide the financial support and the infrastructure to offer quality higher education, good experiences for students. But we also have to make it possible for students not only to enroll, but to persist. And that is an even bigger challenge in some ways, because students and their families may find a way to, we can patch the pieces together through grants, loans, student work experience, that kind of thing, and I get through the first year, maybe the second year. But what we've started to see, particularly over the last 5 years, is a really noticeable decline in the persistence of juniors and seniors at the undergraduate level. It used to be the primary concern was in the first and second year, trying to help students persist. What we're seeing now is an improvement. In fact, this year, we had one of the best years in first-year persistence to the second year that we've ever seen. It's well over 80%, which for us is a very strong number. But we saw the numbers of juniors and seniors persisting decline, so that for the junior class, it was almost lower than the freshman, which is astounding. But I think it's largely driven. In fact, I was reviewing some research recently that, by my interpretation, suggests that roughly a third of our students, frankly, I don't know how they find the dollars to foot the bill. I hate to say that out loud, but that's a fact. And as we, obviously we can find ways to try to economize and be more efficient in our use of resources, but we do a great deal of juggling dollars. A student asked me recently, in the spring, said, well, what kind of background do you need to be a provost? And I said, well, apparently banking. Because I spend an inordinate amount of my time staring at spreadsheets and trying to figure out how to allocate dollars. And so it's an extraordinarily complex set of moving parts to try to support all the different elements, not just of our mission, of fulfilling our mission, but of sustaining those students and faculty. Because faculty members as well we have expectations. We're not a research institution, but we have very specific expectations for tenure-track faculty to engage in research, scholarship, and creative activities consistent with the norms of the discipline. And it's challenging, for example, to find the kind of startup funds that someone, say, in chemistry or physics, people in the natural sciences, need to set up an appropriate lab for the work we want them to do with our students, because that's a fundamental aspect of this as well. Why it's so valuable, if a student wants to be at a place like Millikan, they will be in labs or in other settings doing the work of their discipline alongside the faculty members. I think that's an extraordinarily powerful model, and one that requires a great deal of, I think, inventiveness to figure out how to try to support and sustain and extend. You know, it goes back, the land grant model is a powerful one. People talk constantly about, oh, higher education is all about now trying for people to get a better job, and it's all about economic activity and this kind of thing. And that isn't a 21st century issue. I mean, when the land grant model was adopted by the federal government in the 1860s, in fact, that was one of the drivers. The idea was that colleges and universities, in fact, ought to serve a much wider range of interests of various kinds. What we today call the liberal arts would have been largely unrecognizable to people in the early 19th century. So we have that ongoing challenge, and I think, again, it's that balance, that challenge and opportunity. It's a unique time.
Thank you. Karen, let's just change off from challenges to something positive, okay? I read on Twitter recently from Senator Klobuchar that she was very proud that the University of Minnesota had been named one of the top, 35th in the top universities in the world, which must be a source of great pride to you.
It is.
And I wonder, how do you, as the Chief Academic Officer, encourage excellence?
We recognize and reward it. I know you want us to get onto a positive vein, but you know, it is the excellence of the university really is fundamentally the excellence of the faculty, and recruiting, retaining, helping to develop the faculty who do that work that gets recognized with those kinds of rankings is part of the job of the Provost's office, but it's the job of the deans, it's the job of the administrators to support the work of the faculty, who then support the development of students and do the outreach that is part of our mission as well. We know that we often can't match our competitors in salary. We try to make it a place where people want to do their best work. I mean, that's what faculty want. They didn't generally go into these fields in order to make a ton of money. They did it because they love the subject and they think they can make a contribution to it. So the most important thing for us to do to maintain a quality faculty, who are the ones who are earning those accolades, is to make it possible for them to do their best work. I mean, that doesn't mean that if we pay them half of what MIT is going to pay them, they will leave. They might, but in general, if they have good collegial working groups, and we supply the equipment that they need to do their work, and we recognize and reward them for what they do, and it's a happy place to work. That's what we can do.
I think that's very positive.
Yeah.
But at the same time, across the border here over in Wisconsin, changes to the tenure policy have really rattled the faculty. And so, Beth, what's on your faculty's mind?
So we actually had a situation with the state board 2 years ago. We took about an 18% appropriated budget cut in the last biennium, and the state board was considering changing the financial exigency rules on tenure. And as you can imagine, that was hugely unpopular. And so I felt like it was my role and the president's role to really be out there as the face of the university and supporting the faculty and supporting tenure and supporting the importance of the kinds of lifetime arrangements that we have with faculty. But certainly that caused a lot of anxiety, and it takes a lot of work to convince the faculty that you're out there fighting for them on those sorts of issues. One thing I wanted to add to you're at a much bigger institution than I am. One of the things that I can do, because I'm at a smaller institution, is just show up for a lot of things. I try to go to as many faculty events as I can and talk to the faculty and talk to their students. And so I try to be a presence on campus supporting what the faculty do and just saying thank you and sending little notes. I think at a place like you must have, what, 6,000 faculty? I have 600. So it's a lot easier for me to do that. But I've always thought that the role of the provost was to be out there telling the faculty they are important. They are what makes the university run. And to say that over and over and over again in as many venues as we can, because they often don't hear it from other places. And so it's really important that they hear that from the people that are in the institution, in positions where they can say that.
Thank you. Let's shift to another question about concerns on campuses, because freedom of expression has become, on campus, has become a concern for university administrators. It was a focus of a meeting I attended with university presidents at the AAC&U meeting this year. And everybody had a story about some activists who came to their campus and wanted to talk about something, and the delicacy of the negotiations about those events. What's been the experience, Jeff Milliken? Have you had anything like that happen?
We have not really along that line, but one of the things that happened a couple of years ago that I started teaching full-time in 1981, so I've been doing this for a long time. And a couple of years ago, we had an experience at Millikan that was profoundly troubling. We had students who were members of our football team who, after a very careful, great deal of discussion with their teammates, coaches, and so on, and others, decided that they thought that it was something that they really needed to do to take a knee during the national anthem. And this is an issue that has caused a great deal of consternation for people from all perspectives, and there's a great deal of disagreement and relative unhappiness, and it's a very large set of issues. The thing that was most difficult is that there was an extraordinary and vitriolic response to that. It was for the first time in my career, I was subject to what became a fairly routine experience of receiving threatening phone calls, emails, handwritten letters, threatening, including language like "you should all die," and comments to that effect. And it was really kind of a world-changing experience for me, having spent many years in education, teaching as a researcher, as an administrator. I found it so disconcerting that one of our most cherished values, the idea of civil discourse, the idea of a willingness to at least listen to each other, whether we agree or disagree, was, I thought, very, very deeply wounded through all of this. And the kind of just bitterness and anger and suggestions of violence as a response to this. And again, it was in response to what I would consider to be a very modest act of civil disobedience on the part of some young men who had considered this very carefully. It wasn't in the slightest way a thoughtless or sort of knee-jerk kind of gesture. It was very carefully thought about, and so that whole situation I thought was really difficult, and it continues to sort of bubble under the surface. And what troubles me most deeply about that is that it seems to me to reflect something that is really, at some level, dangerous in our inability to engage in discourse where there may be strong feeling, strong disagreement, without spilling over into kind of this vindictiveness or anger or even threat. That's been my specific experience in it.
You've had one, Karen?
Oh, yes. Still smarting from this because we're still involved in some of the lawsuit groups connected with it. I certainly agree with everything that you just said, and the tensions produce a whole variety of very distressing effects. But one of the things that I think is pertinent, at least for the University of Minnesota, is that we also get caught up in some of the difficulties with discourse that are abroad in the larger society. And frankly, we are being used as a pawn in some ways, and we keep being outfoxed at every turn. Many of people saw what happened with the Minneapolis and the costs that were incurred as it went from university setting to university setting, and costs in both the security and in reputation and in damage to individuals. There are a lot of speakers going from campus to campus, funded. I know this is going to sound like outside agitators. We have our own inside agitators, but many of these people are kind of professional provocateurs, and they have speaking circuits, and we've managed those so far. I think reasonably well on our campus. We've had a number of trial runs with some of the more minor celebrities like Lauren Southern, and we brought it off without any kind of difficulty. As you may know, the University of Minnesota campus is very spread out, and it's a huge campus. It straddles the Mississippi River, West Bank and East Bank, and it extends into St. Paul. And the St. Paul campus is the home of our College of Food, Agriculture, and Natural Resource Sciences, College of Biological Sciences, social work, a whole variety of schools actually have their headquarters there. And I'm saying that because that's relevant. When Ben Shapiro was booked to come to our campus this last year by one of the conservative student groups, they worked with the police to try to find a setting that would be, safe and accommodate their needs. It was a student group, and they asked for first Mayo Auditorium, but that's right next to our hospital, and they said, the ambulances come through there, we can't have a demonstration that would prevent ambulances from coming through. Northrop Auditorium was requested, but that requires that's operated with private resources, and so we'd have to pay a fee for that. So that wasn't a dual thing, because the student group should have free access to auditorium spaces. The student group then also asked for Ted Mann, which is a concert hall. The School of Music had a concert that night, so that wasn't available. They found a ballroom on the St. Paul campus that accommodated 450 people, and we booked it in there. The student group was happy, but it was picked up by the right-wing media to say we had relegated them to the hinterlands off campus and to Nowheresville. We have a campus connector bus that runs students back and forth to go from classes to one campus to another within 10 minutes. It's free. So they weren't relegated to the hinterlands, but the story spread around, talking about the communications you get. I was getting about 200 messages a day, and some of them were, die you scumbag, and some were, you're left wing, so you're trying to suppress speech and so on. How are we suppressing speech and finding a safe venue for 450 students to hear this speech? And since my background is in philosophy and I cannot argue, I answered those messages, all except the die you scumbag. I kind of let those go.
It's hard to
Mostly.
respond.
But when people actually would engage, sort of answer in detail about the circumstances of the talk, what the reasoning was in settling on this, and saliently, the student group was quite satisfied with the venue initially. Now, actually, Ben Shapiro's group has brought suit against the university saying you suppressed freedom of speech. There was a DPA, Data Practices Act, request for all our correspondence with respect to this event. And that's fine, but again, literally, since I was getting a few hundred messages a day and answering them, and sometimes iteratively, 4 or 5 times, and often, with an ending saying, "Oh, but I'm glad you answered me. I do understand now. It's fine," and sort of giving me faith in dialogue again. But it meant literally, I think, from my mailbox alone, and I don't know what happened with the police or the president or whatever, but I'm sure I had at least 1,000 messages on this. I've since seen one of those messages taken out of context and put up on Shapiro's website, actually saying there were lots of other reasons why it wasn't booked into such and such a place. And I'm sort of like, aha, what were those other reasons? Well, those were detailed in the email, and it actually was, again, a very coherent account. It was one of those that ended with the guy saying, "Oh, okay, I'm glad we had this dialogue, I do understand now." And so there, I do want to say that sometimes I think, particularly public universities, which have a responsibility to accommodate both our students and the public's request for space on campus, have a lot of responsibilities here, but we have responsibilities to safety as well as to free speech. And as we try our best to navigate those, no one is ever in a position to say, we should be suppressing one particular kind of speech or another. But we have to keep it safe, and we also have to find a way to let the other activities of the campus go on. And that is a difficult, truth to tell, logistically, it wasn't that difficult. I mean, we ended up scheduling things, ended up putting security out there. There were no problems. We were also helped by very good Minnesota weather. It got so cool that night that hardly had any demonstrators. But it doesn't, in some sense, it doesn't entirely matter because the story can get out in a very different way. And there's been a second blowback ever since the suit was filed. I have not the slightest concern about the suit because I suspect it will be withdrawn because there's absolutely nothing to it. But it takes a lot of energy, and it's unfortunate. And one of the things it discloses is how difficult it is for people to talk together today, including people with different political viewpoints. Our students have different political viewpoints. Our faculty have different political viewpoints. But this is we're very quickly taken over by shell.
Yes.
Did you have anything happen?
We haven't had an incident, and I'll tell you a quick story why, but what I would say that what we've been doing over the last year is actually listening to other provosts talk about, Karen talked this summer at one of our meetings about her experience. Some other people have shared experiences, and so what I've been trying to do is learn from their experiences and prepare ahead of time and learn best practices and some lessons. So, because it's inevitable, it's going to happen sometime. The funny story is what saved us is Milo Yiannopoulos was supposed to end his tour in Fargo on December 20th. And the forecast was it was going to be about 20 below zero and snowing, and he canceled. That's our secret one. Yeah, so, if you want to relocate, that helps.
Well, it's time for questions from the audience. If you have a question for our panel, would you please go to one or the other of these microphones, and we'll see what's on your mind as well from your campus, and you can certainly share who you are and from what campus you're speaking, unless you need to remain anonymous for some reason. About microphone 1, please.
Yeah, hi, my name is Hannah Gardner. I'm from Ithaca College. I'm actually from Minnesota, though. My question kind of pertains to that, though. So thinking about students in high school who are taking AP courses, or like in Minnesota, I did post-secondary enrollment option. I came to college with 30 credits. I could have graduated. I could have been graduated now, but I decided to take on 2 degrees. I'm curious for you at your universities how you find students coming in who have the ability to graduate early, or what you see as this traditional 4-year bachelor's undergraduate degree, and how imperative or important that time frame is, or how, and kind of go back to who are we serving, how are we serving them, what do you see in maybe flexibility in that structure in the future?
I'll be glad to take the first crack at a response. There are a lot of pieces to your question. I think as far as AP credit or dual credit kind of enrollment where a high school student is getting college credit, certainly my institution has, I think, very generous policies in that regard, as long as there is an established standard by which those kinds of hours, credit hours, can be measured and transcribed. We often have students who arrive with 30 to 40 hours of college credit prior to their arrival. Sometimes some of those students are better prepared than others, frankly, and that's something that we try to keep track of and assess in a consistent way so that we have a better understanding of what students are bringing to us. I would love it if more of our students would finish faster, because frankly I think our 4-year and 6-year graduation rates are much lower than what I would want to see. Access to higher education is one thing, but the ability to persist and complete is the essential second half of access. I would say, you know, it is considered somewhat controversial to many people in higher education, but I will speak for myself. My own philosophical position is that there is nothing magical about 4 years. In fact, what I am really interested in is ways in which we can reasonably demonstrate student competence and mastery of essential knowledge and skills. If a student can demonstrate in 3 years that they have in fact mastered the kinds of competencies, the knowledge and skills that we define as requisite to a credential that we're offering, in my judgment, we ought to then grant them that credential, whatever it is. I taught doctoral students for many years, and we did not ever imagine that doctoral education would be better if it was longer. Unfortunately, it sometimes was longer than what we were hoping for. But the truth is, while students had to undertake a prescribed regimen of coursework and so on, there were multiple other measures of their progress and their demonstrations of mastery and competence. That was our foremost consideration, was the student's ability to demonstrate that. I would be very interested in exploring that much more deeply at my own institution, because, and I'm going to add one little caveat to that. I taught statistics to generations of very unfortunate students. I mean, they're fortunate because, sorry about that. They were fortunate because of course, my brilliant teaching, but they were unfortunate because most of them really hated. They didn't want to learn statistics. They thought that it was cruel and unusual punishment. But the thing is, I will tell you that trying to help people understand the nature of statistical analysis, how to use it, what to do with it, what it means, and so on, often does take a prolonged period of time. If I taught a class basic statistical methods in a truncated summer session, the outcomes are going to be, I guarantee, much worse than if I teach it over a traditional 15, 16-week session. Because it takes time to kind of, stew in these juices, I guess, so to speak. It takes time to practice and to think it through. So there's somewhere in there, I think, some kind of balance that I would like to see us explore much more actively with regard to the time in which we expect students to engage in the study of their discipline or earning a degree, and more concrete measures of the outcomes of that.
Do either of you want to comment on that?
Well, sure. I agree with all that. And there is nothing magical about 4 years for an undergraduate degree. We offer a variety of other options, including some where we partner with say Coursera, and offer micro-credentials in certain areas so that and broadly distribute that. And we're engaged right now in a campus-wide discussion extending over a couple of years, as these do, on our liberal education requirements for the bachelor's degree. I share with you the little comment that you slipped in about some people are better prepared than others from those high school, the high school preparation. It really does depend on whether or not I'm not sure that the solution to the issue of how to configure higher education is most directly addressed by thinking, well, we shove that into the high schools and have high school teachers doing it. Oftentimes we find that people who come in with kind of passing grades, so they'll get some credit or they're going to get an exemption, don't realize that they actually haven't been prepared for what we would consider the next success in the next stage of say, working chemistry or something like that. But in a way, that's off to the side. I do think it's time, given new modes of delivery and new expectations about lifelong learning, that all institutions have to be thinking, how do we offer education? How is it bundled? Can it be unbundled in some ways? Are there ways in which we could serve the public better by thinking of higher education in new ways? And we're doing that at the university as well.
Thank you. Microphone 2.
Hi, this is Janice. I'm Janice Herring from California State University, Stanislaus. We have a Korean American female president, and we have probably, I think it's 65% female student population. We are Hispanic serving. And just in light of your the discussion about demographics and the drop-off in student numbers, and how do you also view the potential threats to affirmative action policies that seem to be in the discussion lately?
Beth, is that something that you want to address?
I don't know if I heard the end of the question. I think you're asking me about affirmative action policies.
Yeah, and the potential threats of pullbacks in policies that have been instituted.
It's, I can talk about my philosophical view, which is I think that policies like that enable populations to attend institutions that were not open to them before. I think they were very helpful. Now, we're a public institution, and we're not that selective. And so that issue has, that affirmative action, our cultural diversity sort of naturally comes to us because we don't exclude people based on the test scores or things like that. So for us, the diversity issue is related more to the diversity of the population that we live in North Dakota. I've always been concerned that since I've been there that we do not serve our tribal college populations very well, that we have a real opportunity there to have partnerships with students who attend 2 years and could benefit from a 4-year education, that we don't do enough to encourage those students to come to our institutions and make it possible and make the climate what it should be so that it's welcoming to those students. And I think when there's a national debate about affirmative action and that it's somehow not appropriate, that filters back, even if you're not a university that is like Michigan. But I think that whole conversation sort of filters back to us as well. And so you have to work even harder to say, we welcome every student that is qualified to come here. We want this to be a space where you can pursue your education and be welcome, and everybody contributes to the climate and the culture of what we do. Now, a more selective institution probably has a different take on.
Well, in many ways, I think not fundamentally, because the value of diversity is an educational value as well. I mean, it's connected with students learning from one another, learning from diverse experiences about the people with whom they will be in society, and very often the circumstances, social, cultural circumstances in which students have grown up and in which faculty have grown up have shaped the ways, they've shaped their epistemologies, they've shaped what they notice in life, they've shaped how they might inquire into solving a problem. And this is the argument that most universities that have been entangled in legal battles about affirmative action have made over and over again, and the courts have in the past accepted it, that there's an educational reason for it. And I would add, frankly, also also for research universities, a research reason for it, that different perspectives actually do produce beneficial results in the very crucial elements of mission. For us, research, teaching, and outreach, and understanding where the issues are that an institution of our type has to address. I'm worried about the increasing hostility to considering matters of diversity in our faculty hiring, in our admissions, and frankly, even in the kind of research problems that we look at. I could just add that the universities in the Big Ten Academic Alliance, these big state universities across the upper Midwest and into Maryland, Rutgers, and so on, including Northwestern, a private institution, are in states that are relatively prosperous in the U.S. They also have some of the worst economic disparities along racial lines of any place in the U.S. That's really awful, and we need to be doing more about that. In fact, we have some projects connected with that recognition, and so I think we need to see ourselves entangled in this conflict about affirmative action. I'm very clear on the side I think we should be on.
Thank you. Back to microphone 1.
My name is Matthew. I'm from the University of Kentucky. I'm one of the student vice presidents. And the first half of your conversation kind of dealt with negative aspects of finances, mainly. And I kind of wanted to come back to that conversation because as a student, I see the debt student population, and I'm obviously worried about that myself. And I wanted to know what you, as the provost, the kind of the highest people in your college, your university, are doing to kind of breach that issue. Because as a student from the University of Kentucky, I'm not sure about your individual colleges. I see that faculty members, especially higher administration members, get paid a very large difference from lower level faculty and then other education members across the nation, even high school. I mean, it's extremely different to teach public education in elementary, middle, and high school. But the extreme difference in wages for those different education people is a big issue. And I was wondering what you guys do as far as wages to kind of help the student in that burden.
Thank you. Anybody?
Well, I will speak from the perspective, again, at a private institution. There's nobody at my institution becoming wealthy by what they're doing. And I think that there's a real challenge in this, again, trying to figure out how to balance all of the competing needs, values, goods that come out of the work that we do. And that includes, like for me, looking at the faculty. In fact, earlier today, while I was on an airplane, I was working on a report I'm writing to the faculty. And one of the major issues that I was writing about this morning has to do with compensation, total compensation, salary, benefits of various kinds, including retirement contributions, healthcare, insurance, that kind of thing. And we want in higher education to be able to recruit the best and the brightest to serve our students. To do that and to try to foster that kind of a culture, we need to be able to compensate people in reasonable and fair ways, given the amount of expertise they bring, the time it takes for them to prepare for the work we want them to do, and so on. And that's sometimes a challenge because in my institution, we are not always where we need to be in terms of being competitive in that faculty labor market. The other thing is I see and this is maybe wandering afield from your real question, but I mean, one of the things that I think about a lot now is that there is a generation of people like me who, within the next few years, are going to move into retirement. And I am hiring, over the past 3 years, have hired about 20% of our faculty has been hired within the last 3 years, which is a very large number for us. But those are people early in their careers, and I want to do everything that's possible to help them establish themselves as people who will serve over the long haul as exemplary faculty members, as outstanding teachers and mentors to students, as scholars, artists, and so on, and to build that next generation of leadership to help us move this all forward in the best possible ways. The challenge in the whole mix of things within any institution, I think, is that the cost that students bear, although it may seem to make no sense from a student perspective, but students are not paying a good chunk, a very large chunk of what it actually costs to run the institution. And I think that the challenge is, when I was an undergrad, when I went to school in 1892 as an undergrad, I went to a private liberal arts college, and I paid $1,890 for the year for tuition, fees, room, and board. And yeah, that was cheap then too. But the difference is now the cost that students bear is vastly greater than that. And finding the way to try to help students manage these costs while we also address the essential needs of the university to invest in our people, our facilities, the infrastructure essential to give students what they want and need. I think that's an extremely tough balancing act. But I am so mindful of the cost burden that students bear. It worries me very much. And so that's one of our great challenges, I think, is to try to identify, are there new models? Are there different ways of thinking about this that don't put that kind of financial onus so directly on students?
You know what I'm sorry. What I think about, I'll just add in a quick 30 seconds, and it doesn't respond to your wage question, but to me, the biggest tragedy is students who come in for a year or two and amass debt and leave with nothing. And so to me, what I think about every day is how do we get students across the finish line? And how do we do it in 4 years or less? Because every additional year after that is more debt for those students. And so what I spend my energy thinking about is how do we make our curriculum make sense? How do we get students into the right courses at the right time? And how do we decrease the sort of unearned credits that pile up for students and to get them out of there in 4 years?
I agree with both those things, and I really want to emphasize how important that element of thinking about the premium that comes with the degree compared to the dystopia that comes from accumulating a lot of debt and not getting the degree is. And one of the things that we do institutionally is attend to that problem. When I mentioned that I was an undergraduate at the University of Minnesota, and they're forever at, Board of Regents meetings saying, oh, that was back in the time when anyone with a pulse could get in. And that's sort of true. And their graduation rates were, in the single digits. Now our 4-year graduation rate is about 70%. Our 6-year graduation rate is north of 80%. It makes a huge difference, not only in how much it costs. Every extra semester spent at the university, costs a lot. And so, working on all of those things about good advising, making sure students can get the courses they need, that they understand the programs that are appropriate and desirable for them, is really crucial to keeping down the costs for students. And it is a huge difference between, sort of meandering along for many, many years and then not getting a degree and getting that degree in 4 years. I don't want to sidestep the question you have, though, about various salaries. I think it's it's true, you know, probably, I mean, I'm sort of shocked that I'm making as high as I'm making now, and I never expected that, and I spent most of my life in academia, more than 30 years as a faculty member, making normal salary, and yet, you know, the attention to that is the problem, when in fact, you know, I'm sort of managing a $3 billion enterprise every year. I think it may speak of more public hostility to higher education, which is the root of the problem of why tuition is high at a public institution. It's a withdrawal of public support.
Right, and I would add one thing to that, and that is, especially in private higher education, there's a long history of what often is referred to as the missionary impulse. That is, well, but you want to be a teacher, you're going to follow this noble calling, so it's appropriate you should live in genteel poverty of some kind. I've heard one version or another of that argument many times, and in all seriousness. And I'm unaware of any other profession where it would be suggested that living in comparative poverty, given the level of responsibility and preparation, is somehow appropriate. I haven't heard any attorneys, physicians suggest that, and yet it is still. Oh, right, yeah, it's okay for me.
But I also think about the number of times that, and people who come to mind of the support that faculty and administrators, I mean, the deep, deep desire to see students finish.
Yes.
And I used to speak to them at graduation rehearsal about the value of the college degree that they had achieved by getting to that moment in history. And that's why we always took it so seriously when someone, you know, do you keep one around, you know, who might be on academic probation, but you know that they're going to have another $10,000 in debt as a result of that semester? Really weighed on people. And the finances are just obviously in funding at the heart of so much of this, and does keep these folks up at night. Microphone 2.
Sure. Hi, my name is Rick Ackman. I'm at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Thank you for sharing your experiences. I have a rather open-ended question for all of you. So I'm wondering if there's an unaddressed or generally overlooked issue in higher education that just isn't being talked about, and how you feel your institution is uniquely adept in addressing whatever that particular issue may be.
I live in a world. I think one of the things that I see often is some variation on the argument that, oh, there's all this liberal arts stuff, and you know, you don't need a college degree to be successful, and you know, I guess I see a number of angles to that. First of all, I think it's often overblown, but beyond that, I will confess that as an undergraduate, I had a number of courses that were characterized most notably by the abject boredom of my experience in them. I remember taking a sociology, no aspersions against sociologists, but I was taking a sociology course as an undergrad, and I remember sitting there thinking, I think I'm going to start hallucinating. This is, the professor was a wonderful man, and he just talked at us at extreme length. And so as an educator, and certainly as an administrator, as a chief academic officer, I am, you know, the eternal sworn enemy of that kind of instruction that is just talking at people and not somehow connecting what we're doing to the bigger world. And so I mention it because I think it is a significant set of issues, and it's often oversimplified. But one of the things that I am proud of at Millikan University is that we have worked hard over many years to more fully realize a philosophy that we call performance learning. And the idea is that, the fundamental idea is that in every discipline, students will do the work of that discipline. They will be out in the field, they'll be working with third-party partners, and they will do the real work of the discipline. And that cuts across all disciplines. And so our students are engaged in ways that I am excited about because when I was an applicant for the job, I hold now, I had the opportunity to talk with students in various majors. And when I asked them about their experiences, the more I listened to students talk about the kinds of really serious engagement in the work they're doing. You name the discipline, history, English, biology, music, business, across disciplines. The more I heard those students talk about those experiences, I thought, I want to be at this place. I want to work here because I want to facilitate this great work. And so the years is my 5th year, starting my 5th year now at Millikan. We've worked in a very concentrated way to try to really refine that model and to deepen it. And it may sound, I mean, it's not just internships, it's not just experiential learning in the way a lot of us might think of it. It is a philosophy that has come to really permeate our curriculum across the board. And I think it's an exciting, and maybe it's exciting to me anyway, but it may address the kind of thing that you were talking about. What's something that really addresses an issue that maybe we don't talk about as in the ways that we might? That's what I would add.
Can I add something? You know what I would say, here's what I often hear. Universities are big bureaucracies, they don't move very fast, they're caught in the 1800s, and I think most of us live in places where there is an incredible amount of innovation and excitement and entrepreneurial behavior by the faculty. It's exciting to be on a college campus, and new things are always happening. We don't just sit on our hands. We solve problems, and that's a really exciting thing. We don't talk about that enough. We don't talk about the kinds of innovations and changes in teaching methods or the way that we're thinking about our curriculum. That changes all the time. And that message doesn't seem to get out there.
Yeah, right, I agree.
How about another question?
So sitting in this room right now are current and future campus leaders. In fact, some people in this room don't know yet that they're future provosts too. So what kind of insights or advice might you give to those of us sitting in the room who are growing into leadership positions on university campuses, as we think about and discern what our future is going to be?
David, would you just answer that last part again?
Right, sure. So as those of us sitting in the room grow into leadership positions on campuses, what kinds of insights or advice do you have for us as we're thinking about our future selves as leaders based on the experiences that you bring to your current positions?
I guess one of the things that led me on this path that I sometimes am rueful about that I ended up being an administrator for so long, as opposed to the thing that I went into higher education for, which was to really do philosophy and to teach philosophy. I know really what led to that, and part of it was, if you want to do this is a good thing to do. I did want to understand the nature of an institution in which I was involved. I had a sense in my own life that when I went from a public institution as an undergraduate to a particular private institution, which had a very different culture, and I suddenly thought, I'm going to sound slightly off balance. I don't really understand how this place works. And I, was a fresh-faced Midwestern girl coming to Harvard, where it was a wholly different social system. And I thought, I need to understand how this stuff works. And I think that stayed with me, that I want to understand the things I'm involved with. That actually can lead you to an administrative career, because you end up, serving on committees and, doing tasks that people ask you to do. And then people, then more things open. But I think the crucial thing is to understand how the parts fit together, what the aims are of the various parts. I think we're all, every bit of these institutions is worth knowing about. And collectively and individually, they're dedicated to good ends. It's important to understand those and to be able to find ways of making them fit together.
I'd say learn to listen and learn to ask good questions, which I think goes along with what Karen said.
I guess I would just add a couple of, first, banking. Learn about money. But seriously, I think one of the things I ended up in leadership roles increasingly because I really wanted very much to facilitate the good work of the people around me. And because I increasingly felt kind of driven to try to find ways to do that, I ended up taking on more and different kinds of responsibilities, and I still value that a great deal. But the two more concrete kinds of things, I think, that if I was offering advice, one is, in fact, if your institution has a general budget committee or budget committees of some kind, as has been said in the past, the budget is the truest expression of the values of an organization. And I think being involved in a deep way with budgets in the allocation of resources and understanding how those resources are applied is extremely valuable in understanding the way in which institutions operate and what they do value. The other thing relates to listening, but also really honing skills at effective communication. I grew up as a faculty member, so really was steeped in that culture, I suppose. I was a department chair and so on at a university. And I am sometimes surprised by some of my administrative colleagues who seem to me to be, and I don't mean this in an unkind way, but somewhat tone deaf about the way they communicate, for example, with the faculty. Faculty members are driven by very deeply held values about what they do. And I think it's very important to be very mindful of the ways in which we think about and communicate with people. It is such a powerful way to help build the kinds of coalitions and help facilitate and support the kind of movement within the institution that does, in fact, encourage and support innovation in a forward-thinking orientation.
Got a couple folks here, and we've got just a couple, and then one over here. We've got a couple minutes left. Brother Richard, do you have a question?
Yes, I'm Brother Richard Lundberg.
A little louder, please.
I'm Brother Richard Lundberg from St. Mary's College in Bronco, California. I wanted to ask if you had the Provosts on the panel, if they had any strategies to deal with the problem we have. I think many private institutions in California have right now. The past year, I served on 2 search committees, one for Chief Financial Officer, Vice Presidency, and the other 4 Provosts. We had 2, I thought, marvelous candidates, and they turned us down flat because of the salary. California is a state right now in a real crisis as far as private institutions are concerned, mainly because we can't afford to hire many of these people. 2 months ago, the San Francisco Chronicle published a study that said they found that the median home price in the city of San Francisco was over $1 million. And the median in San Francisco, at least the median rental for 2-bedroom one-bath is $6,000 a month. We simply can't afford this. That's the real problem. And I'm scratching my head. I've talked with the faculty who are colleagues and saying, serving on committees with me and saying, what are we going to do about this? We're missing all sorts of great candidates because they simply can't afford to live in this state. Because we can't afford to pay.
Any quick answer?
Do other states have this problem right now? I don't know if Illinois might.
I'll give you a quick answer, which is, cost of living in North Dakota is not California, but the weather is a problem for us and attracting people to our institution. What I've started, the summers are gorgeous. What I advertise are the summers. What I've done in recruiting people recently is to look for people that maybe have a little less experience than what I would recruit in other places, but look for people that can develop into the position. So maybe we're not going to get the perfect person that has everything we need, but it's somebody who has talent. I can see that the talent can be developed, and I give them that opportunity. So we recruit to that.
Thank you. We're going to take one last question here, if it's quick.
Sure. I've heard a lot about this intersection of the business aspect and finances and student success. How do we address issues of academic integrity from a provost standpoint when there are issues of cheating and not maintaining those standards within the institution with maintaining that revenue, source of revenue?
That's a very interesting question. Academic integrity is something that I think everybody can agree we want to try to foster and maintain. We use a variety of methods. When students arrive on campus, part of their orientation to the institution involves specific kind of programming related to academic integrity and so on. Like every institution, we have very specific kinds of rules against plagiarism, cheating, that kind of thing. We use, as a faculty, we use some of the different kinds of tools that are available that help identify electronically, people who, this is sort of live by the sword and die by the sword, right? Those who crib materials off of the internet are then sometimes shocked to find that other people can find the same things on the internet and identify that they've stolen them. And so we use some of those, and you're probably familiar with some of those products. I think it's an ongoing challenge, and one of the things that worries me even more is that we try to give instructors a great deal of discretion about how they deal with student, for example, cheating or plagiarism or something. The worry for me, and I've observed this far too many times, is that a student may commit essentially the same infraction in two classes. One instructor decides to fail the student and give them an automatic F, that's it, they're done, which is part of our policy. Others will use it as a sort of developmental learning opportunity to sit down with the student, walk through this and say, okay, do you see why this is problematic? You can't do this. So I worry about what kind of a consistent or coherent message we're actually giving the students about that. But I think that the larger concerns about relative dishonesty, or what we would tend to regard as dishonesty, is a really daunting problem. I mean, in fact, I was just reading yesterday, there are some countries around the world that on the days for major exams within their national systems of higher education, they literally shut off the internet. Pantomiming, pulling, that's that big lever that shuts off the internet. But they shut off the internet nationwide to try to assure that students cannot, or at least it's extremely difficult for them to access material that might be available online in some way. And when I read it initially, I thought, that seems a little extreme, but then the more I thought about it, I don't know, maybe it's not a bad idea, but it's because it is a really big issue. And the thing is, it has long-term implications because we want students to gain an understanding of the importance of real work, of doing their own work, of having the kind of integrity that will carry them a long way, personally and professionally, beyond the achievement of credentials.
But don't you think, because I'm just going to try to wrap us up here, but don't you think also that in the culture and the climate of the times, that it's even more challenging to address issues of academic integrity?
Yes, without question. I think it's many times more difficult because education is seen as primarily an instrumental concern. And so if cheating achieves the intended outcome, then cheating is justified because it's just essentially a way of doing business.
Yes, thank you. Well, we could go on that topic, but we've reached the end of our time together, and will you join me in thanking our guests?